In this recording, I want to talk about how to select data to create a chart. There's a bit of an art to it, and if you fail, it can make chart manipulation much more complicated. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And the spreadsheet that I'm using for this, I'm going back, if you've been following my other lessons for this review, or for the review unit, excuse me, going back to sample one. And sample one, we did some autofill, some other stuff, but I'm going all the way back, so all that autofill is gone. So I need to put all that back in again. Remember, we used autofill series to copy the region names over to here. And then we used autofill series with an example, 1, 9, 12. Notice, by the way, that I didn't put the 2000 on there. A lot of books don't mention that, and you end up spending a lot of time typing. If you don't put the 20 at the beginning, it assumes 2000. At some point in there, it goes back to 1900, but probably not something you're going to run into. And another thing you can do is just put in the 19, and it'll put in the year for you. So as long as it knows it's a date, and if you type it something like 1/9, it'll assume it's a date. It'll fill the year in. So if you're using current year, you never have to type it. But I do want the year 12, so I'm going to type that one more time. And I'm doing 19 because I want a sequence of weeks. These are weeks, 1 week apart. And now I'm going to fill those. Now that I've given it the pattern, it knows how to fill in the rest of the dates, and some of them don't fit, so I'll add that to them. I'm going to save this just in case I don't want to step on anything else. I'm going to do a save as, put it in the desktop, which is where I'm storing my stuff. You can do whatever you want with these, and I'm going to call this select data. All right, I want to do some charting. Excel makes charting relatively simple, but there is a bit of an art to it. If I wanted to, for instance, chart this data, I could select it, and then using the new quick analysis tool, you can do charts. And maybe I want a clustered column chart or a clustered bar chart or whatever kind of chart you want, doesn't matter. But I'm going to show you that this wasn't a very strategic selection of data. If I click on this, notice I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different pieces of data. It's counting 10 rows. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 series. But wouldn't it be nice if those region names had been in there? We can do that. Okay. We can also add these dates into it so that instead of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 down here, we get dates. So I'm going to rebuild that chart using a little bit more strategic selection technique. And one other thing I just want to mention here real quick, notice that there are 10 values across the bottom row here and 5 series. What Excel does by default is it takes the largest number of whatever you have. I have more rows and makes them the horizontal axis. If I had only 2 rows, watch what happens here. I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to click on the chart, press the delete key. If I only had 2 rows, then it would build that chart a little bit differently. Notice now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along here and only 2 series. So it uses the smallest number of either rows or columns, whichever one is smaller, and makes that the series names, and it uses the largest number, whatever that is, and makes that the, I believe they call it the category axis. Yep, there we go. Category in the pop-up, and down here, this is the axis. Right, and so those are the technical terms that the book uses. I like rows and columns. So the number of rows, the number of columns you pick does make a difference. But if you wanted to switch that, here's a handy dandy button. I'm in the Chart Tools Design tab. Handy dandy button to flip those around. So now I have 2 groups and 5 series. So if Excel does it the wrong way, it doesn't do it the way you want to, don't freak out. It's a quick button click and it flips them around again and gives you a halfway decent chart. But I still don't have the names, the region names, and the dates. And the obvious solution here is to pick the dates and the region names. So I'm going to pick a bunch here. And let's see if you can graph that for me. Here's my quick analysis tool. Charts. And I want a clustered column chart. One thing, and this caused me a little bit of grief, I almost decided to change it, but it's better to find a solution than to change it. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. Notice that I get every second day on my axis down here. Excel is smart enough to look at this and say, those are dates. And he wants data for every single day. First of all, before I get a little ahead of myself, notice first of all I have dates down here, so that's good. but my bars are so squeezed together that it's causing a little bit of trouble. But I also have as my series the regions. So that's good. Right? So now I have pretty much the data I want. I'm going to delete it one more time just to get a little more practice here. I don't want quite so many weeks. So I'm going to just grab 3 weeks worth of data. But I'm grabbing the titles and I'm grabbing these date labels. Excel is smart enough to recognize that these are numbers, so that must be what you want to graph. This is text, so those must be either the series or the axis labels, and it'll adjust appropriately. So once again, create another column chart. Getting pretty good at this. There's my column chart, and that looks pretty good, except it's flipped sideways. I don't want the regions, how much did you sell in every week? I want to know for every week, what did each region sell? So I'm going to switch the row and column. When I do that, I get this big, huge gap. Again, because Excel recognizes these as dates and figures you want to see the data on every single day. Well, I don't. And this caused me some grief, but I think I finally figured it out. What we have to tell Excel is don't treat these as dates with all the dates in between. I can hide these dates, so it still keeps the columns all separated like this, and I don't like that look. We have to tell Excel that these, they may look like dates, but really, I want you to treat them as text, and that way with these dates in between, there is no way to tell Excel to only give me every 7 days. We can tell it to only display every 7 days. It'll hide these, but you can't tell it to remove those. This big gap leaves enough room for every single one of these days to display one of these little mini graphs. I want to get rid of those. The way you do that is you format. I believe it's the data access. It's probably these. If you double click, it opens up the formatting pane over here. Right. And that's not what I'm looking for. Let's go back to here. There we go. And I go back to, this is the data, the axis options. Right. And notice that it's giving me 1 day. Well, I don't want every day. I want every 7 days. If I change that to 7, it hides all the other ones, but it still leaves this big gap. And there's no way that I've been able to find to get rid of that big gap except to tell Excel, pretend these are not dates but just text. And when you do that, you get something a little closer to what I'm looking for. So now I can easily see that on these days, and this week, region 1 and region 4 sold pretty much the same. Region 1, and I can see how things are rolling here. And I can also switch back and forth again. So in how did region 1, boy, they had a bad week 3 here. Pretty even, climbing, that's good. Whoa, bad week 3. This is what charting allows you to do, is analyze data using pictures. If I switch them back to the retain the text, it does, so that's good. And now I can see how each region is doing in each week. Depends on what you want to see. The nice thing about Excel, I've used it in presentations to analyze data, and somebody says, well, what if we, and then I can show them that data. They can what if, and I can chart it to death. I'm going to delete this again now. What happens if you forget? I'm trying to delete my chart. There it goes. What happens if you forget? And you just select these. Or you forget the region names across the top, or heaven forbid you forget both. Once again, I can create my chart. There is a way to modify the data selection without starting over. Okay, so here's my chart, but darn it, I've got series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I've got numbers instead of dates. The way you modify this is using the Select Data button, and this again is on the Chart Tools Design tab. The Select Data button shows you what's being used for the series and what's being used for the categories. Okay. Notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8 weeks that I selected of categories. If you don't like these labels, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can edit them and then go back to the chart and say, oops, I forgot to tell you, here they are. And it changes them. And unfortunately, I now I've got the big gap in here again. You know how to fix that now by just changing that to text. Right? But that solved my labeling problem. Now here's the series. How do I change those? Well, that's a little more difficult. Each one of the series has its own entry here under series. So here's series number 1. What this Select Data Source dialog allows you to do is 2 things. First of all, designate, where's the label for this? Where's the name? You can actually type it in here. Or you can pick it from the chart. I'll come back and do that here in just a second. The second thing you can change is where are the values in B5 to B12, B5 to B12. So if that was wrong or you wanted to tweak it somehow, you could tweak it here as well and just reselect the data. But notice that series 1 is now called Volcker, and here as well. I can edit it and say, no, it's not called Volcker, it's this name right here in this cell. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to change all of these. Say, get the names from here. If you do it in advance, it works very well. But I don't know of any easy way to change all these if you forget ahead of time. So I'd have to go to your Series 2 and edit and click on Region 2 and click on OK and so on. I'll do one more. Edit, Region 3, OK. One other thing to recognize while you're here is you can rearrange these. If for some reason you're focusing on Region 4 and you want it to be the first bar, you can move it up. Click it. Might as well edit it while I'm here. It's not going to take long. Click on OK. And then using these arrows, I can move it up or move it down. So I can actually rearrange these without rearranging my spreadsheet in the chart. Now it's at the top. And the Region 4 values are gold, and they appear first in this chart. So when you're selecting data, generally it's a better idea to select the labels for your data as well. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes with charting it takes a little bit of experimenting, but I found that that works pretty well. Now that shows how to do column charts. Same kind of techniques work for line charts because you typically have a series and an axis, but a pie chart doesn't have that kind of information. And before I forget, another thing you will probably never do is graph this data along with its total, along with the totals. So I'm just going to copy a few of these here. I could do a bunch, but there's enough. Okay. Now, if I wanted to graph all these things, those totals are huge numbers compared to these. 5 times as big, probably more. All right. So it's not a good idea to combine the totals with the data that builds them because your charts are all distorted looking. Let me show you what I mean. Go to the charts and clustered column, and notice how every one of these, what did I click on? Let's change the chart type if you forget. Right here's the button. Chart tools design, change the chart type. I want a clustered column chart, please. There we go. Click on OK. And notice that big green bar that just overrides, oh, that's the total. And it distorts the appearance of the chart. And so it's never, almost never, it's tough to say never, but it's almost never a good idea to chart totals along with data. So when you're selecting data for your charts, remember to exclude the totals. Now I want to go down here to the bottom, and I want to highlight these, and this is a shortcut I showed in one of my previous recordings. If you highlight all of these and then hit auto sum, Excel is smart enough to say there's no numbers over here, so he must want the sum up above, and he must want that for every one of these columns, and sure enough it fills in those values. When you're doing pie charts, you're trying to display the percent of total. So here's my 5 regions, and I didn't copy the totals for each region or for each week all the way down. And I want to graph these. Well, the titles are way far away. Right? They're not next to it like in the examples I've done before, but that's okay. When you're creating, and again, this is part of the strategy, when you're creating charts, even if the cell data is separated, you can still select them both by creating what's called a collection of cells. I've selected these, and now I want my titles. So I'm going to scroll back up again, and there's my, and that's kind of a pain. Let me show you a better way. I'm not holding down any keys, so now I've changed my mind and say, no, I want to select those, and now the number's at the bottom, but I can't see them. It could be thousands of rows below. One of the things you can do is split your screen. I'm going to put my cursor in cell A10 just as a positioning place, and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to ask Excel to split this screen. You can split the screen in up to 4 different quadrants if you wish. Right now I'm in column A, so it's going to split it into 2 halves. If I put it in column H, it'll split it into 2 halves left and right. If you put it here, the cursor here, and say split, it splits it into 4 quadrants. To get rid of these, you just double click them or turn off the split. And so that's from the View tab. But I'm going to use just row 11 here, and I'm going to say split. And now I only get 2/2 of the screen. So down here, oops, click, come down here, and I can display the totals here. And up here, I can display the titles and select them both. To select them both, oops, I'm scrolling the wrong direction, sorry. To select them both, you drag one, and then you create what's called a collection of cells by control dragging the others. So I've selected my titles. Now I'm going to control drag my totals. And that didn't quite work. Let me try it one more time. There we go. I don't want the totals. Now I control drag them. Notice the quick analysis tool doesn't come up when you create a collection of cells. So when you create a collection like this and you want to do a chart, you have to insert a chart. Insert, and here's a bunch of different charts. You can ask for recommendations, but I want a pie chart, and I happen to be a favorite of 3D pie charts. Okay. And that preview you see behind the screen is probably correct. I could do a donut chart, or I'll just do a 3D pie chart. There's my 3D pie chart. Now I'm going to go back to View and remove my split. And so there's my chart. And notice that each one of the colors is already labeled with region 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I hadn't done that, if I'd forgotten, once again, I could go to Design, select Data, and here's my different regions, and they would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on them, and I'd have to edit each one of those, or actually I could select them all and adjust it. So the point of this whole lesson has been select your data carefully. Include labels if you can figure out how. And then finally, if you need to, you can select data, hit the Select Data button under Chart Tools Design, and modify those to your heart's content, including if you forget one, you can add a whole new series. Now in a pie chart, that doesn't make sense. But in a column chart, I didn't show you that, you can actually add a new series here. Remember we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 series. If you forgot region 4 and your chart's beautiful, and then you figure out you forgot it, simply add it. Add a new region, give it a caption, and you're done. Final thing I want to show you is that you can move charts and put them in a better location. The book tends to like to have the charts inside of a summary worksheet, and they keep them nice and small, and this one looks good. But what I like to do is put them in a separate sheet. Okay. Click your chart. Again, Chart Tools Design, there is a Move Chart button. And you can tell to move it to a new sheet. It'll create a brand new sheet. And you can name it whatever you want. And it picks up that chart that used to be in here, it's gone, and moves it to a completely separate chart sheet. You can then drag to the end if you want, move them around, you can rename it, but now it's much bigger and you can manipulate it better. Hope that helps you when you're designing, when you're doing your homework, selecting the data. The good news is in the book, when they ask you to create a chart, they tell you which range to select, which is really kind of lame because you need to get used to selecting the range of data yourself. Grab the titles and the data, and if need to, manipulate your chart.